Okay, well, it is 11 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. I know we have a whole lot to cover. Again, if you're just joining us, welcome. Please go ahead and mute your mics as well so you can make sure everybody can hear. It doesn't cause any interference. I'm Jen Wade. I'm the Grants Division Director over at OPB. So happy you guys could join us this morning. We are going to be recording the webinar and we'll post it online. I'm hoping to get this online today so that you guys can share it with any engineers or any folks that are helping you write grants or just to refer back to as you're going through the process. All right, we'll get started. So we're going to talk about the drinking water projects to support increased population. And I know we've had a lot of questions on the general purpose of this grant. And unlike water sewer infrastructure under Tranche 1, where the eligibility was clean water state revolving fund and drinking water state revolving fund eligibilities outlined in Treasury's at the time interim final rule, this grant is focused on increased population. It's the primary driver is the need for drinking water capacity to support an increased population. While the focus is the drinking water project, secondary components that are eligible under Clean Water State Revolving Fund may be considered if they support increased capacity for the drinking water project proposed. As you all may remember, under interim final rule, at the time when we were going through all of this, under the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, it did not allow any support for increased populations. It was considered ineligible. Now with final rule coming out after we had awarded water sewer infrastructure Tranche 1, the expanded eligibility allows us now to provide this grant program to allow projects to support increased population and future growth. The program total that is allotted to this grant program is $400 million. And I just wanted to remind you all, with all of these, those are just planning amounts. So if we see a need that is over that amount, some of these projects could be very large, then the governor has the ability to increase that funding depending on the demand and the volume of applications that are eligible. We have a dedicated website. I put that here. It's our opb.georgia.gov/drinking-water. If you go to that website, the application is available on that website. It is different from our first tranche. So you're not going through our grants portal. You're going through a different avenue. It's much more streamlined. It's very user-friendly. You can actually print down a PDF so you can go in. If you want to take a look at the application questions, we only have an hour to cover all of this today. So I did not break it down one by one, question by question, but feel free to go in there, create an account just to look through the questions. You can take a look at it. You don't have to actually submit the application. You can take a look. You can actually do it in different orders. There's some uploads that we ask of you as well, so you can do those in any order. You don't have to do the application first. The application period, it opened August 15th, and it will run until September 9th, 2022. That ends on 11:59 p.m., and that is Eastern Standard Time. The eligible applicants are going to be counties and units of local government. So I know a lot of you have engineers that are helping you. You might have grant writers. The application facilitates collaborators. They can go in there and start the application. You want to just make sure that you're putting the information in for the eligible applicant, so that way it's eligible and deemed so. This will be a reimbursement method. These funds will be made available through the exact same mechanism that we implemented for the water sewer infrastructure. It's a modified reimbursement method. You can take a look at that in our post-award FAQs for more information on that. Just as a reminder, all eligible applicants must have and maintain an active UEI or unique identifier number from sam.gov. As you may remember, they are still, or they had a backlog and they still have a backlog. I think they're much closer now. I think it's only a few weeks now versus the lengthy time it took before. From my understanding, when you go to register your entity, you receive the number, and then it takes some time to get it active. So please make sure that you do register, get your UEI, and work to make sure that it is active so that you qualify to receive the funds. Okay, I just covered the UEI. Funds for this grant program are made available through the ARPA State Fiscal Recovery Funds, same as the water sewer under Tranche 1. Award time frame, is forthcoming. It just depends on the volume of applications that we get that are eligible and our subsequent review process. We'll have more information about that at a later time. And projects will have until October 31st, 2026 to complete the project. And this is, as you many of you probably know, state fiscal recovery funds are good through December 31st, 2026. And this is just to ensure that OPB has enough time for a liquidation period. Okay, so we're going to get into the eligibility requirements. We understand how vague this may seem, so I want to break it down for you guys. I think the purpose might help a lot in defining a single purpose for this grant. This eligibility is taken straight from Treasury's final rule. They do not provide a definition for population growth. We have not set one, and that is to everyone's advantage, so we're not saying it has to be 20% population growth or anything like that. So we're leaving it up to the applicant to demonstrate that. The final rule provides that recipients may use state fiscal recovery funds for the projects that are needed to support increased population in certain cases now. Treasury interprets this to mean that those investments must be responsive to an identified need to achieve or maintain an adequate minimum service level of service, which for some eligible project categories may include reasonable projection of increased need, whether due to population growth or otherwise. So this particular grant is for population growth. So this is where the eligibility comes from in final rule. Again, interim final rule did not allow it, and so now final rule does. It also interprets it to mean that investments will be cost effective for meeting that need, taking into account available alternatives. For this eligible use category, drinking water expansion for population growth, expansion of drinking water service infrastructure, the project must also be projected to be sustainable over its estimated useful life. The projects that meet the eligibility requirements of 40 CFR 35.3520, other than B1 of that regulation, have to have these following conditions met in order to be eligible. The project is needed to support increased population, and that need has to be assessed at the time it's undertaken. In this instance, it would be at the time of application. The project is designed to support no more than a reasonable level of projected increased need, whether due to population growth or otherwise. The project is cost-effective, a cost-effective means for achieving the desired level of service. And the project is projected to continue to provide an adequate level of drinking water over its estimated useful life. Also, Treasury's final rule provides that funds may be used for rehabilitation of dams and reservoirs if the primary purpose of the dam or reservoir is for drinking water supply, and the rehabilitation project is necessary for continued provision of drinking water supply. In considering whether a dam or reservoir project is necessary for the provision of drinking water supply, a recipient may take into consideration future population growth in certain circumstances. This is all in the application as well as on our website. So I'm just going to jump to the eligibility for the dams and reservoirs. Again, meeting the requirements of 40 CFR 35.3520, other than there are actually a couple sections in there. The prohibition of the rehabilitation of dams and reservoirs in that section E1 and 3. And the requirement in 40 CFR 35.3520 B1 that is needed to address present or future of health-based drinking water standards, provided that if the dam or reservoir project does not meet the requirement, the project must be needed to support increased population with needs assessed at the time the project is undertaken, and the project must be projected to continue to provide an adequate level of drinking water over its useful life. The primary purpose of that dam or reservoir has to be for drinking water supply. The project is needed for the provision of drinking water supply with the assessment at the time the project is initiated. I know this is all redundant, but I just want to go through this with you guys. The project is designed to support no more than a reasonable level of projected increased need, whether due to population growth or otherwise, and the project is cost-effective means for achieving the desired level of service. So you guys kind of see the recurring themes here. So in addition to the application that you guys are going to fill out, there are some uploads that we are going to require. One of those is a cost effectiveness analysis. And through the surveys that you guys provided, had a lot of questions on the cost effectiveness analysis. I'm going to call it CEA for short because it's a mouthful for me. So for the CEA, we do have on our website, the link is here. It's also linked on the website now too. We have a template for you guys to use that walks you through what that should look like and what that should include. So you can go there. I'm going to go through that as well, just briefly after this. We also ask you to upload a vendor management form and W-9, and that is just to facilitate the post-award process more efficiently for us. We're asking for your financials. We ask you to fill out, so you're going to download and then complete and then re-upload a tool for assessing risk. And then we're going to ask you to provide proof of your SAM.gov registration. That can be a screenshot. It can be a print to PDF. Any of those will work. Also, a detailed project timeline. So this project timeline should indicate exactly what phase of the project will be done by whom at what time. And we're going to ask for a detailed budget worksheet. So this is different than tranche 1 where we ask for a budget within the application. We also ask you to upload a detailed budget worksheet similar to our post-award final budget approval, again, collecting this on the front end. For these projects, we get a lot of questions on how detailed this needs to be. This needs to be extremely detailed. This needs to be based on actual cost estimates. If you haven't bid that out, that's okay, but you should have some basis for putting the totals that you put into your detailed budget worksheet. And in your budget narrative, you should explain how you have broken down those if you've not already obviously bid those out. If you've reached out for quotes or things like that, you should explain to us how you came to those totals if you don't have an attachment to provide from a vendor that includes a detailed cost breakdown. In addition to that, if you have match funds that you're using for some of that portion of a cost breakdown or portions of your detailed budget, you're only going to include the ARPA request in your budget. So only grant funds and how you plan to use ARPA dollars in the detailed budget worksheet. If you have a corresponding cost breakdown from an engineer or from a vendor or whatever it is, make sure that it is very clear on that cost detail breakdown how much of that, which of those items on there are going to be paid for with ARPA dollars and which will be used with match funds. And that just helps us, again, just determine allowability and use of funds as well. And then also you have the option to put in letters of support in there. They're not required. Everyone usually always asks about letters of support, so we wanted to include that as well. Just please be mindful. They have to be attached to your application. We cannot accept emailed. We can't accept. It is difficult for us to even get the corresponding application ID when we receive them in the mail. Sometimes we have very limited information, and sometimes somebody may send us one where the applicant hasn't even applied yet, or they never submitted their application. So it does have to be attached at the time that you submit the application. So again, more information on the cost effectiveness analysis can be found on the template provided on our website and the link that I just had on that other slide. But I wanted to break down what it must include. I want to go back to, so it is very drinking water specific. Treasury didn't give a whole lot of guidance to on the CEA, what it should include. So we follow 2 CFR, and that is very drinking water heavy. So in a nutshell, you want to show that you evaluated other methods, right? That you've compared that cost to other methods. You want to show the relationship between the capacity of the alternatives and the needs. You want to show the sustainability, right? If it's, again, primary focus is drinking water. If you have a secondary component that is not drinking water, you still need to show everything that is outlined here and how it fits into that project. So for point number 1, an evaluation of the alternative flow reduction methods. If grant applicants demonstrate that the existing average daily base flow from the area is less than 70 gallons per capita per day, or if the regional administrator determines the area has an effective existing flow reduction program, additional flow reduction evaluation is not required. Again, that description of the relationship between the capacity of alternatives and the needs to be served, including that capacity for future growth after the treatment works become operational. An evaluation of improved quality attainable, quality, sorry, y'all, my glasses, quality attainable by upgrading the operation and maintenance and efficiency of existing facilities as an alternative or supplement to construction of new facilities. An evaluation of the alternative methods for the reuse or ultimate disposal of treatment wastewater and sludge material resulting from the treatment process. And a consideration of systems with revenue generating applications. All right, I'm going to stop there briefly for just questions on the cost effectiveness analysis, if you guys have any. You guys can use the chat as well. No questions? Oh. I cannot hide the on your side for waiting in the lobby. That's a setting on your side for Teams. Apologies, but we cannot control that on our side. I'm sorry. If you click on View Lobby, it shows it all to the right, and the pop-up won't show on your screen though. All right, we'll keep going. I would put my glasses on, but then I have the glare, so I'll just keep squinting. Okay, guys, so we're going to talk about scoring criteria. So you will be, obviously, if you've seen the application, if you haven't, these are the applicant proposal narrative content that will comprise the scoring criteria. So it'll be description of the issue, that will be 15%. Project design and implementation will be 30%. Capabilities and competencies will be 15%. Performance measures will be 10. The budget, including the budget narrative, so make sure that that is very detailed, will be 15%. And then matching funds are not required, but they will be scored, so 15% there. This may look very familiar. This is the same scoring rubric we used for Tranche 1. Okay, so I'm going to go through each of these sections with you guys. And this will talk through what you need to put into the description of the issue, the capabilities and competencies, etc. Applicants must define the specific problem, identify the need they seek to address, and how it aligns to the eligibility outlined in the Treasury's final rule and its alignment to the drinking water to support increased populations program criteria. The description of the issue also should provide specifics on how your projects are needed to support that increased population, demonstrating the assessed need, and applicants should provide data to support the claim for increased population. So again, there is no definition for increased population with Treasury, so we're allowing that flexibility there, but we do want to reiterate that you must show increased population with data, and it cannot be projections. It has to be actual. So whether you have, industrial or population data to back that up, it is up to the applicant to show that need based on that data. Additionally, describe the process used to assess, analyze, or determine the nature of the problem. And this is where it goes back to being responsive to an identified need to achieve or maintain an adequate minimum level of service. And we've talked through this again too. For each eligible project category may include a reasonable projection of increased need, whether due to population growth or otherwise. Project design and implementation. Give me 1 second, guys. Someone took over my screen. If you guys wouldn't mind not messing with a slide, for some reason, you guys have access to move it around, I guess. Back to presenting. Can you guys give me some thumbs up once you can see the presentation again? Thank you guys. Perfect. Okay. Okay. So for project design and implementation, you guys need to identify the plans for implementation of the proposed program and the program objectives, and describe the vision for the target population, specifically how the vision will address the problem identified in the description of the issue, and the broader impacts of the community, jurisdictions, or industries. And make sure that your objectives are clear, measurable, and identify strategies to achieve the objectives. You should include a comprehensive timeline, and again, that goes back to the attachments and the uploads, that identifies your milestones, the funding source for each milestone, numerically lists deliverables, and indicates who is responsible for each activity. Okay. For capabilities and competencies, applicants should demonstrate their capabilities to implement the project and the competencies of the staff assigned to the project to include the financial management of funding. The applicant should detail the level of support for the project as well as the expertise of the individuals who will be responsible for managing the project. Applicants should also demonstrate their experience managing projects with federal funding. Performance measure section, applicants should describe the process for measuring project performance, identify who will collect the data, who's responsible for performance measurement, and how the information will be used to guide and assess the program. Successful applicants will demonstrate understanding of performance data to be collected and reported in the Treasury Compliance and Reporting Guide. So OPD will use that as the metrics that it will use to collect for this program. For each project goal, applicants should identify the criteria that will determine how and if the objectives have been successfully met, and one or more specific measurable outcomes, and the data sources that will be used to determine whether that outcome was accomplished. For the budget section, applicants should submit a budget that is complete, reasonable, cost-effective, and is allowable use of funding under the chosen category. The budget must be based on quoted estimates and calculations, not rounded guesstimates. All budget totals will require a validation based on the calculation provided in the uploaded version, so please ensure that you retain the documentation for the basis of all calculations in the requested budget. And again, just a note on the detailed budget worksheet that's required as the upload. Budget narrative is going to be scored as a part of your budget. So the budget narrative should explain the estimated costs by line item or category in the budget. They should explain how the costs associated with each line item in the category relate to the implementation of the project. Budget narratives must explain how the costs associated with each line item or category relate to the implementation of the project as outlined in the proposal being submitted. And you guys probably don't have any subawards. If you had any multiple projects, etc., you could break it down by project. That would be fine too. Budgets must respond to the following: provide a description of the position, equipment, supply, travel, etc., requested on each line, and how it's related to carrying out the objectives and goals of the project. Your narrative must provide granular detail on the proposal, on what the proposal will fund and how it aligns to your project. So I think one of the biggest questions that we get asked is, again, how detailed the budget needs to be. The answer is extremely detailed. As granular as you can go with where you are in the project. So matching funds, just the plan for leveraging any matching funds, if you have some, from other sources to maximize the impact. Include the details regarding the total project costs if a match is part of the proposal, the amount of the match, and how match funds will be used, and a breakdown of grant funds to be used versus total project cost. If you have no match, then just enter 0 for that line. And here's the example that we use in the application. Again, your actual requested amount is going to be grant funds. Your detailed budget worksheet should only be your ARPA request. And here's where we're asking you to say, here is my ARPA request. Here's my, whatever match and the fund source. And this is what that totals up to be for my total project costs. All right, before I get into the questions, any questions on the application itself? Hit some of these in the chat real quick. I was going to get to that. There is not a maximum grant fund request.
Jen, there was a question earlier in the chat. Jennifer Suttles asks, does the dam rehab require that the drivers are based on population growth?
So the last part again, does the dams require?
Does the dam rehab require that the drivers are based on population growth?
The grant itself, the driver is population growth. Are there any more in the chat, Amanda, before I move forward?
I think you've covered all of them.
Okay, so a couple questions that I want to go through briefly before we open it up. A lot of the questions that you guys sent in were, I have this project, is it eligible? And this is where it gets really difficult for us because it all depends on a lot of things. Several of you just, put something in there about water lines or, something like that without the information on increased population. So I can't even tell you if it's eligible under because of that. There's also taking into the account all of the things that Treasury is requiring to be an eligible project. So it really depends on application review. So we can look at that, the need that you're demonstrating to support increased population, showing that it's designed to be, reasonable level of projected increased need, showing that it's cost effective by reviewing the cost effectiveness analysis, making sure that's sustainable over that period of time, and that if it is a dams and reservoir project, that the eligibility requirements are met for that as well. So if you have very specific questions about a project that you want to, set a meeting up with us, I'll have a slide at the end where you have our contact information. And if there are very specifics, we can walk you through and we can tell you this looks like it's within scope of this. We're happy to tell you that. But the eligibility is really something that's tricky for us until we see the application to where you show, all of these things in your application so that we can determine if it's eligible based on the way you've responded. Okay, and I'm going to go to, so what population data is required? This has been a big question too, again, so Treasury does not define population growth. And so we're letting the applicants, put their data in to support their increased population. We are looking for actual population figures to demonstrate an increase in population, to demonstrate that need. Comparison of population figures over time. Industrial projects to show that population is increasing. Population projections are not acceptable. Anticipated industrial projects are not acceptable. Statements of general population increases without data is not considered acceptable either. So it has to be, this is our population growth. Here's the data to back that up. Is match required? I covered that. It's not required, but it will be taken into scoring. And no, there is not a maximum requested amount under that fund. The 2 CFR 200 is applicable to all of the state fiscal recovery funds, including the drinking water, to support increased populations. That includes subpart B, C, D, E, F, and some other ones I'll go into on the other slide. These are all super important, but again, just like we always do, we wanted to drive home on the single audits. Anybody who receives funding of $750,000 or more is required to do a single audit, and the procurement, competitive procurement. So the same thing you saw for state fiscal recovery funds, competitive procurement, et cetera, under subpart D will still be required. Reporting, again, I pointed to that compliance and reporting guide where Treasury outlines what we are required to report back to them. We may ask for additional status updates and some other metrics throughout the life cycle of the grant, but you can find the initial ones in that compliance and reporting guide. Strong labor standards in water, sewer, and broadband construction. The interim final rule and then Treasury's final rule also includes language on this. They encourage recipients to carry out investments in water, sewer, or broadband in ways that produce high quality infrastructure. They encourage recipients to use strong labor standards. Treasury also recommends that recipients prioritize in their procurement decisions employers that can demonstrate their workforce meets high safety and training standards, professional certification, licensure, or robust in-house training, hire workers and or workers from historically unserved communities and who directly employ their workforce or have policies and practices in place to ensure contractors and subcontractors meet high labor standards. They further encourage recipients to prioritize employers, including contractors and subcontractors, without recent violations of federal and state labor and employment law. I'm just going to skip to the good part. We say all this to say I know there's an FAQ that is kind of confusing in Treasury's final rule where it states that funds that are solely funded by a state fiscal recovery fund don't require Davis-Bacon and things like that. But OPB will be looking for strong labor standards in water, sewer, and broadband construction. David Luker, if you're on, do you want to talk briefly about this in your side of things?
Yes, Jen. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. Yeah, I think the confusion stems from Treasury's FAQ, which states in that first sentence that Davis-Bacon is not required for projects funded exclusively by this fund. However, they wrap up the answer to that FAQ explaining that projects over $10 million will be required and can demonstrate their evidence of requirement with certifications related to the Davis-Bacon Act. So I think the short answer is that for our projects over 10 million, Davis-Bacon is the primary evidence of displaying strong labor standards, and for projects under that, it's a little less prescriptive. But I'm happy to cover that a little bit in the audit section when we get there. But I think that's the long and short of it.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a question. Okay, the environmental review. So the state environmental review process under the Environmental Protection Division is applicable to these projects. You can find more information on that with the link provided here. It's also on the website. It's on our For Grantees page as well. There's also a webinar under the For Grantees webpage under our webinars tab that goes through that process. It's the responsibility of the subrecipient to consult with the appropriate EPD office with regards to the project's impact and any necessary environmental review. Please note that consultation with the appropriate office needs to be completed prior to beginning any projects for projects that have not already begun. Grantees will be required to submit environmental review documentation prior to any payment request submissions. All right, David, I'm going to turn it back over to you briefly to just discuss that audit process.
Sure. Thanks, Jen. So as Jen mentioned, uniform guidance in 2 CFR is in scope for this program. As such, RSM, fifth largest accounting firm, has been engaged to provide monitoring for both fraud, fiscal negligence, and noncompliance with uniform guidance. And so as such, each subrecipient will be subjected to certain monitoring and audit inquiries, interviews, and information requests. If we could skip to the next slide, I think that's the best place to provide a summary of what that looks like. As Jen mentioned, the detailed budget worksheet is one of the important pieces of the initial evaluation of project budgets in terms of feasibility. So those budgets will be reviewed by our team for outliers, detailed unit prices, as well as any other cost elements that can be benchmarked within the current program, within the prior water and sewer infrastructure program, as well as other industry benchmarks. So it is important that, as Jen mentioned, you clearly identify the unit prices and quantities where available. We understand some of these projects will be in different phases of their development, and so the level of detail of estimates may vary, but we ask that you produce the most detailed estimate available at that time. We also would, of course, encourage everyone to enact strong document management and retention controls for all project-related documents. As you see in the audit areas examples to the right of this slide, our auditing and monitoring activities will include various scopes of work, procurement of contractors, as well as disbursements of funds to those contractors are of primary importance when it comes to uniform guidance and will be a significant focus of our audit activities, as well as the documentation of change orders and contingency usages. There are non-financial elements that will be in scope for our auditing procedures, which will include permitting and inspections, compliance with the state's environmental review process, as well as safety and other aspects of the construction fieldwork. Our teams will, in some instances, perform site visits of these projects. We will conduct interviews with laborers in the field. We will interview subcontractors, as well as bidders for subcontracted scopes of work or contracted scopes of work to the subrecipient. So in short, I would encourage everyone to engage in strong control environment activities, document those controls, and have that documentation readily available to auditors when requests are submitted. RSM will also be providing reviews of the payment applications that are submitted into the grants portal. And so that is the first step of subrecipients evidencing compliance with uniform guidance by the submission of bid documents, solicitations, proposals from bidding contractors, as well as executed contracts with contractors. In terms of the expenditures support in those pay applications, obviously invoices and timesheets and proof of payments will all be things that our teams will be reviewing and requesting from subrecipients as they submit. And if those things are not included, they will be put on return status or rejected status. And our auditors will follow up to understand more about your control environments. We go to, Jen mentioned the SAM, as well as the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, where single audits are posted. Our teams will obtain and review all the single audits, as well as those management letter comments, in order to inform our evaluation of risk for each subrecipient. So we would just encourage everyone to maintain a strong control environment, document, and be responsive to the audit process. So you can skip to the next slide. So this slide is fairly redundant with most of what we've talked about, but I know procurement is generally one of the areas where we receive the most questions, and there can be some variations in the level of supporting documentation that is required by uniform guidance, but we would encourage everyone to consult with 2 CFR 200.320, well, really 317 through 327 is the full 2 CFR procurement guidance, but there are opportunities to justify non-competitive contracts in certain circumstances, it's very important that you understand what those circumstances are and that you document any justifications related to that. And another point that we would like to drive here is that as subrecipients engage with contractors, they have to comply with those procurement guidelines. When contractors engage in the procurement of their subcontractors, while they are not required to comply with the specific procurement requirements of 2 CFR, there still should be a documented trail of evidence that shows how those subcontractors were procured, as well as any modifications to those subcontracts should have supporting documentation so that that can be flowed through all the way back to the subrecipient and audit teams as they request that information. It's important that we understand not only how the subrecipient engaged their contractors, but how contractors engage their subcontractors. So, Jen, I think the next slide is just a picture of my face, so no need to cover that. But thank you all for the time, and we look forward to working with each of you in the audits process. We know that it's not always enjoyable to have an auditor requesting information, but our teams work with water and sewer infrastructure programs across the country and hope that we're able to make this as effective and painless as possible. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. So thank you, Jen, for the time.
Thank you. Okay, so here's a slide for, program questions, application questions, anything like that. So Russell and I can field those. Again, if you have specifics where you want us to sit down and talk through those, we can facilitate that. And then any procurement, anything that is under the umbrella of what David just outlined for audit process, if you have procurement questions, making sure you're in line with 2 CFR 200, you can email RSM at that Georgia ARPA email address.